Part 1. The Two Fathers. When Robert Kiyosaki thinks of his childhood, he doesn't see numbers, charts, or business deals. He sees two voices, two fathers, each speaking with love, but with completely different maps of the world. One father wore a tie every morning, polished his shoes, and believed in the power of education. He told young Robert that success lived inside schools, diplomas, and stable jobs. He was intelligent, disciplined, respected, a man who paid his bills on time and dreamed of retirement with dignity. Robert called him his poor dad, not out of disrespect, but because that mindset, for all its nobility, never led to freedom. The other father didn't have a degree. He spoke bluntly, laughed loudly, and wasn't afraid to lose. He believed the world belonged to those who understood how money moved, not those who merely worked for it. He wasn't always gentle, but he was generous with wisdom. He taught Robert to look at life as a playground of opportunity. This man became his rich dad. Robert grew up walking between their worlds, between security and possibility. One father said, "Go to school so you can find a good company to work for." The other said, "Go to school so you can find a good company to buy." One believed a paycheck was safety. The other believed a paycheck was a chain. And somewhere between those two philosophies, Robert began to realize a truth few people ever see. Money is not the goal. It's the test. It measures how deeply you understand value, risk, and growth. He learned early that the rich and the poor aren't separated by intelligence or effort, but by mindset. The poor think in terms of survival. The rich think in terms of strategy. In the small town of Hilo, Hawaii, where he grew up, Robert and his best friend Mike would watch the wealthy kids drive by in shiny new bicycles and wonder what made their parents different. Curiosity turned into action. At the age of 9, Robert asked his real father how to become rich. His poor dad laughed kindly and said, "Go to school, study hard, and you'll get a good job." But that answer didn't satisfy him, so he and Mike went to Mike's father, the man everyone knew was successful, even though he had left school early. They asked if he would teach them how to make money. Rich Dad smiled and agreed, but not for free. "Work for me," he said, "and I'll show you how to think like the rich." The boys eagerly agreed. For weeks, they worked in one of his small stores, stacking shelves, sweeping floors, earning 10 cents an hour. It was dull, mechanical, almost humiliating. Until one Saturday, Robert quit. He stormed into Rich Dad's office, angry. "This isn't fair," he said. "You're not teaching us anything. You're just using us." Rich Dad leaned back, calm as ever. "Good," he said. "Now you're ready to learn." And then came the lesson that would echo through Robert's life. The moment you get angry, you stop thinking. Most people spend their lives working for money, feeling trapped, afraid to lose their job, afraid to offend their boss, afraid of starting over. Money controls them because they've never learned how to control it. He paused, letting the words sink in. "I wanted to teach you what it feels like to be trapped by money, so you'd never let it happen to you again." That was the beginning. From that day forward, money became a teacher, not a master. Rich Dad didn't teach through lectures. He taught through experience. He made the boys observe how people behaved when they paid bills, when they got raises, when they bought things they didn't need. He made them see the invisible emotions behind every financial decision: fear and desire. Most people, he said, wake up, go to work, pay their bills, and repeat the cycle. That's the rat race. The more they earn, the more they spend. They buy bigger houses, better cars, but never more freedom. He explained that the poor and middle class work for money, while the rich make money work for them. He didn't mean it poetically. He meant it literally. Money, he said, is a servant. If you don't learn to manage it, it will manage you. As the weeks passed, the lessons grew deeper. Rich Dad introduced them to small ventures, renting out comic books, buying and reselling trinkets. He showed them how small amounts of money, multiplied by creativity and persistence, could turn into income streams. It wasn't about getting rich overnight. It was about developing the habit of seeing opportunity where others saw obstacles. Robert began to notice that his poor dad, for all his intelligence, avoided conversations about money. He would say things like, "I can't afford it," which ended every discussion. But Rich Dad said, "Ask instead, how can I afford it?" One mindset shut the door, the other opened it. That single shift, from resignation to curiosity, was the seed of wealth. By the time Robert entered his teenage years, he saw the world differently. Where others saw jobs, he saw systems. Where others saw expenses, he saw investments. His two fathers lived in the same city, but they lived in different realities. Poor dad worried about job security. Rich dad created jobs. Poor dad hoped for promotions. Rich dad looked for opportunities. Poor dad believed in saving pennies. Rich dad believed in expanding vision. The irony was that both men were hardworking, honest, and kind, but only one understood how money truly works. Rich dad said, "You'll never find freedom working for someone else's dream. Build your own. Even if it's small, even if you fail, build it again." That advice sounded bold, even dangerous, but it planted a spark that would grow for decades. Robert began to read books about investing, business, and economics, while his school friends studied math and literature. He learned that wealth wasn't a number, it was a structure, a living thing built on assets that generate more income. And those who learned to build that structure could eventually buy their time back. Meanwhile, poor dad kept saying, "Study hard so you can get a good job." He meant well. He wanted stability for his son. But Robert saw that stability often came at the cost of freedom. That realization, that you could be highly educated and still financially unfree, became the foundation of everything he would later teach the world. Rich dad used to say, "The poor and middle class work for money. The rich make money work for them. The rich are rich because they know what to do with money once they have it. Most people don't." He encouraged Robert to learn how to read financial statements, not because he wanted him to be an accountant, but because he wanted him to understand the story money tells. A balance sheet, he explained, is not just numbers. It's behavior. It shows where your energy goes. An asset is something that puts money in your pocket. A liability takes it out. It's that simple. Yet most people never learn it. They buy liabilities thinking they're assets, houses, cars, gadgets, and spend their lives paying for them. They think they're climbing the ladder, but the ladder is leaning against the wrong wall. "Don't chase status," Rich Dad told him. "Chase freedom." And freedom begins with education, not the kind they teach in school, but the kind you teach yourself. Robert's real father was proud of him, but also confused. He couldn't understand why his son spent weekends working for free or talking to businessmen instead of studying for exams. He told him, "You should focus on getting good grades." And Robert respected him deeply, but he couldn't unsee what Rich Dad had shown him. He began to realize that traditional education, for all its value, was not designed to make people wealthy. It was designed to make them dependable. Schools produce employees, not entrepreneurs. They reward obedience, not creativity. Rich Dad said, "The world needs both, workers and creators. But if you want freedom, you must learn to think like a creator." That idea frightened Robert at first. Freedom, after all, requires responsibility. You can't blame the government, your boss, or luck. You can only look in the mirror. And that's when he understood the real difference between his two fathers. One wanted comfort, the other wanted growth. One believed life was something to manage. The other believed it was something to design. And that realization, subtle but powerful, marked the true beginning of his financial journey. Part 2. Lessons of the Rich Dad. As Robert grew older, his lessons with Rich Dad moved beyond small experiments and into the deeper mechanics of how wealth was built. Rich Dad's world wasn't about luck or greed or chasing status. It was about understanding systems. Money, he explained, is not the goal. It's a current, a flow, like electricity. If you understand how to direct it, it lights up your life. If you don't, it shocks you. He showed Robert how most people live in silent fear of money. They chase it when it's missing. They worship it when it arrives. They lie awake at night thinking of it. But very few ever study it. People spend years studying medicine, law, or engineering, Rich Dad said. But almost no one studies money, even though they use it every single day. Robert began to see that the problem wasn't intelligence, it was ignorance. The poor and middle class weren't lazy, they were simply uninformed. They had been trained to believe that money was mysterious, dangerous, even immoral. They were told to work hard, pay taxes, and let experts handle the rest. But Rich Dad believed that delegation without understanding was the root of poverty. Rich Dad started teaching about cash flow, the invisible story behind every person's life. Most people don't have money problems, he said. They have cash flow problems. He drew a simple diagram, income on one side, expenses on the other. When income stops, most people collapse instantly. A job loss, a hospital bill, one crisis, and years of stability vanish overnight. True wealth, he said, is measured not by income, but by time. How long could you live if you stopped working today? That question haunted Robert. He realized most people were only a few paychecks away from panic, and that fear kept them obedient. Rich Dad believed the most powerful thing in the world wasn't money, it was leverage. He defined leverage not as exploitation, but as intelligent use of systems, people, and time. Poor people do everything alone, he said. Rich people build teams, systems, and structures that multiply effort. Robert learned that wealthy people use corporations not to exploit others, but to protect their efforts and optimize growth. While an employee earns and gets taxed before he can save, a business owner earns, invests, and then gets taxed. It's the same dollar, but used differently. He explained taxes, debt, and law not as threats, but as tools. The rich don't avoid rules, he said. They learn them, because once you understand the game, you can play it better than those who don't. This changed everything for Robert. He stopped seeing wealth as unfair and began seeing it as a language most people never learn to speak. Rich Dad also taught that the biggest obstacle to wealth wasn't the economy or luck. It was fear. Fear of losing money, fear of failure, fear of judgment. Everyone has fear, he said. The difference is what you do with it. Fear can paralyze or it can sharpen you. It's the same emotion, but a different decision. He made Robert practice taking small risks. Investments, ventures, experiments. Sometimes they failed. Sometimes they succeeded. But each time the lesson was worth more than the money. The poor avoid failure at all costs, he said. The rich learn from it until it costs them nothing. Robert began to see that success wasn't a straight line. It was a spiral. Each failure moved him higher if he paid attention. One evening, Rich Dad took Robert to watch one of his rental properties. The tenants were paying rent, the maintenance team was handling repairs, the manager was overseeing everything. Rich Dad simply observed. "See this?" he said. "This is how you make money while you sleep." He wasn't bragging, he was teaching. Every hour you work for money is temporary, he said, but every hour you build a system, you gain a lifetime of return. He called it buying your freedom one asset at a time. Each investment, no matter how small, was a brick in the wall of independence. Robert realized that wealth wasn't built by chance. It was built by pattern. And that pattern always began with the same question. Does this put money in my pocket or take it out? That single question became his compass. As Robert grew into adulthood, the voices of his two fathers became louder, sometimes even conflicting inside his mind. Poor Dad said, "Be careful." Rich Dad said, "Be prepared." Poor Dad said, "Find a good job." Rich Dad said, "Create one." Both loved him. Both wanted the best for him. But only one taught him how to see the world as a builder, not a worker. He began noticing the language difference between the two. Poor Dad talked about earning. Rich Dad talked about creating. Poor Dad focused on security. Rich Dad focused on freedom. And then came one of the most powerful lessons. Don't let money be your excuse. Make it your reason. Rich Dad also taught Robert that wealth without purpose is empty. He said, money amplifies who you are. If you're greedy, it makes you greedier. If you're generous, it multiplies your generosity. He reminded Robert that true wealth is measured not by what you have, but by what you can give without fear. That's when you're really rich, when you can share and still feel secure. That teaching would stay with him forever. He also learned that there are 4 kinds of people in the world of money, a lesson that would later become famous as the cash flow quadrant. Employees who work for others, self-employed who work for themselves, business owners who build systems that work for them, and investors who let money itself do the work. The goal, Rich Dad said, is to move from the left side, where you work hard for money, to the right side, where money works hard for you. Robert saw this as a mental migration, from dependence to mastery. It wasn't about becoming a millionaire overnight. It was about learning to think differently every single day. Rich Dad also warned him about the most dangerous of all traps: comfort. The more comfortable you become, the less you grow, he said. Comfort keeps people repeating what worked yesterday, even when it stops working tomorrow. He explained how most people work for money out of habit, not need. They fear change more than poverty, so they stay stuck in jobs they dislike, living for weekends, never realizing that time, not money, is their greatest asset. Robert learned that money flows to those who respect time. When you waste time, you're wasting the one currency that never replenishes. When you invest time in learning, building, or creating, you're compounding it. Time, like money, can work for you or against you. Rich Dad believed that financial education should be emotional, not just intellectual. He'd say, if you can't control your emotions, you can't control your money. Because every financial decision, whether to invest, to buy, to sell, or to quit, is emotional first and logical second. The poor panic when the market falls. The rich see discounts. The poor spend windfalls on pleasure. The rich reinvest them in freedom. It wasn't about greed. It was about discipline. Discipline was the bridge between goals and results. Without it, even the smartest plan crumbles. When Robert entered the adult world, he saw how accurate his two fathers had been. His poor dad, despite a stable income, often struggled with bills. His rich dad, even after setbacks, kept growing stronger. It wasn't luck. It was literacy, financial literacy. Rich Dad taught that the greatest investment is not in stocks or property, but in your own mind. The more you learn, the more you earn, he said. Not because money magically appears, but because you start recognizing doors others walk past. Robert began to see opportunities everywhere, in conversations, markets, ideas. It was like seeing in color for the first time after living in black and white. That's when he understood the ultimate lesson. Money isn't the teacher. You are. Your results reflect your thinking. Your thinking reflects your beliefs. And your beliefs can be rewritten at any time. The key isn't to chase wealth, but to evolve into someone capable of holding it. That's what Rich Dad had really been teaching all along. Not finance, but consciousness. Part 3: Freedom, Mastery, and Legacy. By the time Robert reached adulthood, he had lived long enough to test both philosophies. He had worked, failed, invested, and observed. And what he discovered confirmed everything Rich Dad had said. Money doesn't change who you are. It reveals who you've been all along. He met brilliant men who lived in debt. He met modest men who built empires quietly. He saw that intelligence alone was useless without discipline, and talent wasted without courage. Rich Dad's voice stayed with him. Money is a mirror. If you fear it, it will control you. If you respect it, it will serve you. And Robert began to understand what that really meant. That wealth wasn't about possessions, but perception. Most people never escape poverty because they never escape the mental cage that poverty builds. They think money is scarce, that opportunity is luck, that risk is danger. But the wealthy think differently. They see money as abundant, opportunity as infinite, and risk as a teacher. The difference is not income, it's imagination. Rich Dad had once said something that Robert never forgot. The greatest prison is the one built from comfort and excuses. Those words haunted him. He started seeing how people use comfort like a blanket, soft but suffocating. They'd say, I'll start investing when I have more money, or I'll study business when I have time, or I'll chase my dream when things calm down. But things never calm down. And so they spend their entire lives waiting for the right time to begin, never realizing that the beginning is the right time. He saw the world split into two groups, the ones who act and the ones who explain why they didn't. And only one group ever becomes free. Freedom, as Rich Dad taught, is not built in a day. It's built decision by decision, habit by habit, year by year. Each investment in yourself, each book, each idea, each risk, compounds like interest. He often compared money to energy. You can waste it, save it, or direct it, he said. But only those who direct it create momentum. And momentum was everything. Once you start building assets, discipline, and perspective, your life begins to accelerate. Not because of luck, but because of leverage. Robert learned that discipline was the hidden currency of success. You could lose everything and rebuild it as long as you kept your discipline. You could change countries, careers, or economies, and still thrive if your habits stayed intact. Rich Dad taught that money is just the outer layer. Mindset is the foundation. And that foundation is built from small daily choices: what you read, who you listen to, how you react to fear, how you spend your spare time. Robert began to notice something subtle. The more he learned, the less emotional money became. It stopped being a source of anxiety or pride and became a measure of effectiveness, like oxygen to a fire. It existed to keep the flame alive, not to define it. He started teaching others, sharing what he'd learned, and discovered that most people didn't need more income. They needed more insight. They didn't have a financial problem. They had a perspective problem. They believed wealth was about working harder, when in truth, it was about thinking clearer. The richest people weren't those who did the most. They were those who did the right things repeatedly. Consistency beat intensity every time. Rich Dad used to tell him, don't just earn, build. Don't just save, grow. Don't just plan, execute. These simple phrases became the architecture of Robert's philosophy. He realized that wealth was less about numbers and more about flow. The ability to keep energy, money, and learning circulating through your life. Stagnation kills both water and wealth. You must keep things moving, expanding, compounding. He often reflected on how both of his fathers had been right in their own way. His poor dad gave him love, morals, and education, the roots. His rich dad gave him vision, courage, and systems, the wings. And together they shaped a balance that the world desperately needs. Because success without wisdom becomes arrogance, and wisdom without action becomes regret. As Robert began to write, teach, and speak, he saw how deeply people hungered for permission. Permission to dream bigger, to break patterns, to think differently. And he realized that was the real message of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Not how to make money, but how to reclaim your agency. You are not your job. You are not your paycheck. You are not your debt. You are the mind that can change it all. Money, he said, is just a language. The rich are fluent. The poor never learn the grammar. He told stories of people who began with nothing. Teachers, soldiers, single parents, who changed their lives by changing their focus. They stopped asking, what can I buy? And started asking, what can I build? They stopped chasing promotions and started building portfolios. They stopped waiting for miracles and started creating systems. And little by little, the compound effect of intention transformed their lives. Freedom didn't come as a jackpot. It arrived as a quiet confidence, the peace of knowing your life works for you, not against you. Robert also learned that wealth is meaningless without purpose. He saw people become rich and miserable, prisoners of status, drowning in possessions. They had all the comfort in the world, but no direction. Rich Dad had warned him, money doesn't make you happy. It makes you more of what you already are. So work on who you are first. That wisdom stayed with him. He began to see money as a magnifier, not a healer. If you're generous, it multiplies generosity. If you're fearful, it multiplies anxiety. If you're wise, it multiplies impact. That's why true wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in freedom, integrity, and peace of mind. He realized that everyone, rich or poor, is ultimately playing the same game, but on different levels. Most people spend their lives playing defense, saving, surviving, reacting. The rich play offense, learning, building, investing. The poor focus on income. The rich focus on assets. The poor worry about expenses. The rich design systems. It's the same board, but the strategy is completely different. And anyone at any time can change sides if they're willing to learn. Robert often repeated one line: financial freedom starts the moment you stop blaming and start building. Because blame is the most expensive emotion in the world. It costs you focus, creativity, and time. The world doesn't owe you anything, but it offers you everything if you're willing to see it. He believed that money rewards clarity. The clearer your vision, the faster it finds you. People think opportunity hides behind complexity, but it hides behind simplicity. Buy assets, reduce liabilities, learn, reinvest, repeat. That's it. But the hardest part isn't the math, it's the mindset. As his journey continued, Robert saw how fear disguised itself as logic. People said things like, "I'm not ready," or "It's too risky," or "That's not realistic." But beneath all those excuses was the same voice, fear pretending to be wisdom. Rich Dad had called it the inner accountant of fear, always calculating losses but never counting potential gains. He taught that every successful person has to outgrow that accountant. You don't silence it, you educate it. You feed it with knowledge until fear becomes curiosity, and curiosity turns into power. Robert also learned that wealth is not a destination, but a discipline. You never arrive, you continue evolving. Markets change, rules change, the world changes, but the principles don't. Create value, manage cash flow, protect assets, keep learning. He saw that the people who stayed free weren't the ones who won once. They were the ones who kept playing wisely. Freedom is not a trophy, it's a practice. You earn it every day by refusing to slip back into ignorance. As he looked back on the voices of his two fathers, Robert felt gratitude. One taught him how to fit in, the other taught him how to stand out. Both gave him the balance between intellect and intuition, duty and daring. He finally understood that true wealth isn't about escaping work. It's about transforming it. When you love what you do and design systems that serve your values, work becomes expression, not imprisonment. That was the real secret. Money was never the goal. Freedom was. And freedom, he realized, isn't just financial, it's spiritual. It's the ability to wake up without dread, to act from purpose instead of fear, to choose who you spend your time with and what you build your life around. It's the quiet knowledge that you're not just surviving the world, you're shaping it. That's the freedom Rich Dad wanted for him. And that's the freedom Rich Dad Poor Dad offers to anyone willing to listen. Because you don't have to be born rich to become free. You just have to decide to learn. So remember, your job isn't your destiny. Your salary isn't your worth. Your mistakes aren't your limit. You can start now, where you are, with what you have. You can build, grow, and become the person your future deserves. The tools are in your hands. The next move is yours. If you want to keep growing and mastering yourself, follow the Clearance channel.